Hey everybody, Steve here from Thinking Sideways. I'm of course joined by my unnatural co-host, Ben.
G'day, buddy.
What you're about to listen to is an episode of the new podcast Ben and I host called Unnatural. This show brings you stories about the strange and the weird, things that'll make you think twice about the world around you. And now, we hope you enjoy this episode, but please be aware that only a couple of the episodes are going to be featured in this podcast feed. So if you enjoy this show, please look up and subscribe to Unnatural Podcast on whatever your favorite podcast platform is. That's how you're going to get us for all future episodes. All right, thanks, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Abnormal, irregular, atypical, deviant. Unnatural, a podcast about things in our world that are inconsistent with what we foolishly expect. Join Ben and Steve as they share stories that you won't believe are real.
Well, hello and welcome back, everybody. It is another episode of Unnatural. I am, of course, Steve, joined by, as we like to refer to him, this mountain of a man standing next to me. Maybe a statue. It's a statue of... How are you, Ben?
I'm well, thanks, mate. I'm a statue of a bloke.
Oh,
I'm a big bloke.
No, I meant you're a mountain of a man. You're man-normous. I don't know.
Man-normous.
This did not go according to plan. Well, hey, everybody, as with episode 1, episode 2, we have an unnatural story to share with you. It is the Moving Coffins of Barbados, which is kind of a ghosty story. Maybe, maybe not. So what do you say we hop right into the story, Ben?
Let's go. Let's do it.
All right. So our seemingly unnatural event takes place in the graveyard of Christ Parish Church in Barbados, specifically in the tomb of one Colonel Thomas Chase. Now, Mr. Chase was not a very well-loved man in the area at the time, but he died in 1812, and he was interred in a tomb that he had purchased about a decade before that. He wasn't, by the way, though, the first person in that tomb. The tomb had been around for 90 years, been built 90 years prior, and 3 other residents or occupants were there before he was placed in it. And those people were Miss Thomasina Goddard, who was placed there in 1807. She was an elderly woman. Then there is baby Marianne Maria, who I believe was one of Colonel Chase's children, but the reporting's a little sketchy. But she was a baby, obviously by the name baby Marianne. And then another of his children by the name of Dorcas Chase was placed in the tomb in 1812. So Colonel Chase's family prepared his body as one would normally do in that time, and then they went and they opened up the tomb. And when they opened the tomb, what they would find is that the caskets, which had originally been placed in there in a nice, neat, orderly row, were instead scattered about the tomb. And this is the weird part, is that they just said, oh, well, I guess it's just grave robbers doing something. And they shrugged the whole thing off, and they put all of the existing caskets back in order. They placed Mr. Chase's lead-lined coffin in place in the tomb, and then they sealed it by putting the lid back in place. And what you need to know is that the lid of a tomb, especially this particular tomb, it's not like it's just a sheet of wood. It's a marble lid that took between 4 to 6 men to move it, meaning that whoever had gone into that tomb to just playfully move around coffins would have had to go through a lot of effort to do so. Now, I know just as we were talking about this, you had mentioned to me, Ben, that you knew why they were lining those coffins with lead.
Yeah, well, they generally line them to preserve the body. And that would preserve the body for about a year. So sealed airtight. And this basically slows the decomposition of the body, keeping the moisture out. So thus keeping the body preserved longer. This also helps with keeping the toxins from escaping the coffin into the atmosphere, eliminating harm from the outside environment.
I have a question about that, buddy.
Oh, yeah, yep, sure.
Why are they preserving the body? That's what I don't get.
If they ever need to get to it again, maybe it's going to be in one piece and not deteriorate. Oh, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't get that part, but yeah, it's interesting.
Okay. I wasn't sure either. I understand the, trying to keep the noxious gases from spreading around.
Yeah.
Graveyards and tombs and things are pretty gnarly spaces to be in because of the decomposition. So that part makes sense, but I don't know why they were touting that it would preserve your body for a year, and unless they're going to cure whatever killed you.
Well, I mean, I guess that may be one of the things that they were thinking about, maybe re-releasing or opening up the tomb and then trying to see if they could somehow bring a body back to life. I mean, it sounds pretty Frankenstein, but I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I have a fear. Yeah, I don't think they were trying to do that, but it's weird. But anywho, I apologize. I derailed you there because I know you were gonna talk about some other stuff here.
Yeah, no problem, Steve. So in 1816 and then in 1819, Thomas's tomb had to be opened to allow for new occupants. Each time the coffins in the tomb were moved from their positions. So it's important to note that the number of times the tomb was opened varies, and accounts put it somewhere between 2 and 4 times. The same thing occurred at both times, which would have been quite horrifying to witness. So there's no evidence of any tampering, aka marks on the door, or from thieves using things like pry bars or even scratches and stuff like that. So any signs of breaking in, that was never ever found. So they never found any sense of anyone trying to enter the tombs. There was apparently stories about, people hearing moans or screams being heard from in the tomb, but I think that's more likely it was just some ghost stories being told, around the campfire after a few glasses of delicious rum. Yar! Yar, she says.
Is that your pirate voice?
Yar! Yes, it is.
Yeah, that was fantastic, man. Wow. Okay, so anywho.
No worries. The second to last time the tomb was open for the local governor and the officials to come and inspect it, they determined that there wasn't a secret entrance to the tomb, which people thought there may have been.
Who would want to use a tomb besides a bunch of goth kids going out and drinking at night? That's why would there be a secret entrance?
Who knows? So to try and figure out who was disturbing the coffins, they spread sand around the floor and around the tomb to try and see if they could reveal footprints. And they used concrete to seal the lid of the tomb. That would make it incredibly heavy and tight for anyone to try and move. And so the final time they went to open the tomb, they found that the concrete seals had been unbroken until they broke them to get in, of course, and the sand still scattered around, being undisturbed, without any footprints, and the caskets thrown around as usual.
So, as I think we all kind of understand that in 1812, people are pretty superstitious, and at this point, the locals decide that enough is enough, and they took all of the caskets out of the tomb and they reburied them individually. They buried them individually in their individual graves in the ground. And from that point, that tomb was basically abandoned and left unused. And as far as I can tell, I think it still sits there empty to this day. Now, on the outside, it totally looks like there is something unnatural and spirit-based going on. So obviously some spirits were very peeved off at these people and were throwing temper tantrums and tossing the coffins around. And if this story is real, and that's a big if, and that means it isn't petulant spirits, then there has to be some natural reasons for what was observed, even if they are unnatural in what people are expecting. So just so you understand, part of what I just said is when I said this may be real, is that reporting of things in the 17 and 1800s sometimes can be fishy. And there was a very similar series of events described from Estonia, a story coming out of Estonia in 1844. So that's 24 years later. The same story seems to have cropped up in writing. And unfortunately, because of the area that it's in, there are very few surviving written accounts of this series of events. A lot of the helpful records that might have been around, they've just been lost through time or deterioration. And the only really solid writing we have about the coffins in Barbados comes out in the 1860s, and then again in some small articles in the early 1900s, the first decade of the 1900s. So knowing that, you can understand why people, they feel a bit dubious about this story. And some of the researchers who have gone on about it have said, oh, well, there's got to be some giant misinterpretation, some farce going on here. And some of them have gone so far as to say that this entire story, this is probably the farthest out there thing I've heard in a while. This entire story was written in code using Masonic symbols so that the readers later on who knew what the Masonic symbols were all about would get the code, but the people who were unaware of the key to the code, aka the Masonic symbols, would just take it at face value. They would assume that moving coffins and spreading sand and things like that just were moving coffins and spreading sand, not some other coded word. It's kind of a keypad for a hidden message. That feels a little weird, but if indeed this did happen as it's described, ignoring the Masonic key code thing, then there should be some natural causes that are at work to make such an unnatural story. And we have to try and figure out, well, what's the most probable answer? There's the old thing of, well, Occam's razor, what is the simplest answer? That's probably the right answer. And in this situation, that might actually be correct, because the most probable explanation is water. So the island of Barbados, this is where I go into Wikipedia and I start pulling out numbers, and then I simplify it because the numbers just get really boring. The island of Barbados gets a lot of rain each year, and being in the Caribbean, it's subject to tropical storms and hurricanes, things that can dump massive amounts of water all at once. So now that I've told you that, we're going to put a pin in it, because you had another direction or some other information that is probably going to help this water bit make more sense, Ben.
So remember when I talked about how Colonel Chase's casket was lined with lead, Steve?
Right.
Well, one of his daughter's caskets was also lined with lead. While a casket like that would weigh around 250 to 300 pounds, which is about 113 to 136 kilograms, about my weight, it's also full of air. And while it wouldn't be buoyant, it couldn't float, it would at least be neutrally buoyant. So it wouldn't sink straight away either. So you also need to know the part of buoyancy is water displacement, which is one of the things that allows things like massive aircraft carriers, those things that have sometimes hundreds of planes just sitting on the top of it. And you think, how does that not sink, when these things weigh like 90 tons?
Yeah, they're huge.
Float. Yeah, they're huge. So this is all based on some back of napkin math out there, but, we can have a look at that in the future somehow. But yeah, I don't understand how this works myself. It's just that's the science of it.
Well, it's when a heavy thing pushes enough water out, it ends up floating up. So if we combine semi-buoyant caskets and we combine it with a space that is lined with stone, because that's what a tomb would be, and that means that the water that comes in can't just readily all escape right back out,
Gotcha.
then it would be the perfect cocktail for mysteriously moving coffins because all the water rushes in. Those coffins can kind of drift and float around. This also makes sense why there was no footprints in the sand, is that the sand just sinks. And as the water drains away, it doesn't do anything to it.
Yeah, true. True.
The thing I also, do you ever do this, Ben? Do you ever go on Google Maps or Google Earth and try and find weird sites like this?
I've tried to look for sites like Atlantis and so forth. They say this could be Atlantis, and then there's a picture of a UFO that's in the water and, things like that. Yeah, I have, yes.
Okay. So I did that for this. It took me a little hunting around, but I believe I found where this particular tomb is on the island of Barbados, and it's about a half mile away from the coast. It's about 800 meters away from the coastline, and it's only about 30 meters above sea level, which is about 100 feet above sea level. So you could see how rising tides, torrential storms, it seems like it's a perfect recipe full of water. But then again, we don't have any stories from other tombs in the area having their caskets kicked around.
Yeah, but 30 meters is quite a fair distance.
Oh, you mean in terms of height? Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, in height.
But that also means the water table's probably weird in that area. I got to imagine they have a really strange water table.
True, and it's nearly a kilometer from the water, and then so the water. I guess depending on the tides, you do get that.
So I guess let me clarify that. I think I maybe misled you, which means I probably misled some listeners. What I mean is that the island of Barbados is an island that has ridge lines. It's got some high peaks. They are higher than that 100-foot above sea level line. So all that water that falls on the peak and the sides of the island, that's also going to be running downhill and running through the graveyard.
Gotcha.
I was getting that as as a symbol or a sign of the fact that there should be, at certain times of years, all big sheets of water coming through the area that could then run into the tomb through cracks in stone and stuff like that. Does that make more sense?
Yeah. So it's not all from the tidal waters rising.
Yeah.
It's from water from the mountains, water from here, water from there, because it is quite a stormy, watery place.
Right,
as you mentioned earlier. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, okay.
So it's inundated with water, the tomb.
Yeah, but again, you would think that if that was the case, then why the heck isn't there a whole bunch of these other stories? I don't know. It's unnatural that these caskets are moving around, but it seems like maybe there's a natural process that could be the cause, but we'll never know because the reporting on it is, it's 200, a little over 200 years old now.
Well, I reckon if science can't prove it, it might be supernatural. It might be just something that is just too strange for us to understand. It could be just so unnatural.
Does that mean we got to get Sam and Dean on the case because it's too supernatural?
Got to get Sam and Dean on the case. I don't know who Sam and Dean are, by the way.
I realize that it's a supernatural pop cultural reference, and some people will get it and think it's funny, and everybody else is going to think I'm a dork. It's okay. I'm fine with being a dork. Well,
you are a dork.
I am a bit of a dork. It's fine. Well, that is our unnatural story of the week. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you liked it. It was fun for me, and that's really why I picked it and dug into it. Now, you can, if you like this episode and you like the podcast, feel free to subscribe to the podcast in whatever podcast app you like to use. We're going to be on them. And you can find us on social media. Just look up Unnatural Podcast, and you should find us without any trouble. It's a bright yellow logo, so it's nice and easy. Until then, we will talk to you next week with our next Unnatural episode.
Bye-bye.
Bye.